Hey folks, thanks for joining. And we're here to talk about everything you need to know about Global CBPR but are afraid to ask. So first will be a quick intro, then we'll talk about who participates in the Global CBPR Forum program and CBPR in general, mapping it to a couple of key and common frameworks and laws, program benefits, and then the path to certification. So Noel, I'll hand it off to you to talk a little bit about the intro here.
The Global Cross-Border Privacy Rules Forum, we're going to abbreviate that to CBPR, but that's what that stands for. It's Cross-Border Privacy Rules. And we're primarily talking here about data transfers. And so the Global Cross-Border Privacy Rules Forum started in 2022, and it grew out of a previous program. Let's go to that slide, which is known as APEC, right? So APEC, the bigger organization, is a gathering of 21 countries or economies, whose goal is really to promote trade and remove barriers to economic growth. And one of those, potential barriers to economic growth is under the category of data privacy, right? Because transferring data across international borders, unlike goods, right, can be done very easily. It can be done instantaneously, and sometimes it can be done really without even knowing that it's happening. And also, because of the rules around data privacy, with all of these different economies having different sets of rules, it creates, difficulties for transferring and moving that data. So this is one of the areas where they focused and they created the APEC privacy framework. And so, APEC itself touches four different continents. It's, Asia, Australia, North America, and South America. So that whole Pacific Rim, which is also the Ring of Fire for geology nerds out there. So covers those sort of four quadrants. And the way that it was set up is these economies could join this CBPR system, right? And sort of agreeing that for the countries that join, for when companies are certified to that, they can then transfer that data in and around those countries. So that's great. Great idea behind it, great intentions. However, you'll see all this gray area are all the countries that don't participate in that and can't because they're not part of APEC. And so what started to happen is some countries outside of that region started to recognize it as an adequate system. Even though they weren't members, they said, well, if you have that certification, we will still recognize it because those principles either align with our country's law, etc. And so that continued to happen. And really there was a need for an expansion of this program, which is what led to this APEC system being expanded to the Global CBPR Forum. And so the Global CBPR system, Global CBPR Forum, now is this transfer mechanism or this transfer tool that companies can use to transfer data, eventually beyond just the countries that were joining in the APEC system, to countries in other continents as well. And so there's two sort of versions of this certification. There is the cross-border privacy rules certification, and then there is the PRP, which is privacy recognition for processors. I'm going to talk about that one first. So that one is primarily for data processors or personal information processors. And it is focused on sort of the requirements and obligations when a company is acting in that role. And so that can be used to share with data controllers that they're working with to demonstrate that they have all the sort of security and accountability measures in place to be a good data processor, a responsible data processor in this context. And the CBPR system is a little broader. It covers various types of data sets, right? It can cover employee data, customer data, or frankly, just other types of data, maybe clinical trial data, et cetera. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the principles and things of that, but those are the two systems. This is how the Global CBPR Forum came together. And let's talk about what they've been working on. So the Global Forum Assembly is the body that oversees the Global Forum, and they have a few objectives. One is to administer this system of certifications that maybe some of you participate in, but some other objectives are facilitating that free flow of data. This group of countries that participate, and even those that don't, meet regularly to sort of discuss this and collaborate. They provide a forum to share best practices and promote cooperation amongst each other and other countries. And then pursuing interoperability, right? Because there's so many privacy laws, there's so many privacy frameworks. This is really key and beneficial to not only governments, not only enforcement agents, but to companies and to individuals as well, right? Interoperability is really beneficial. Some of their strategic goals that they're working on. So they started in 2022 and they've been doing a lot since then. So first is just operationalizing, which they've been doing that over the last 2 years. And so we'll be seeing the launch of these certifications soon. The other thing they've been doing is prolifically, I would say, is promoting membership. And that is membership of other countries. So they are actively going out and providing information to other countries to share with them, what the goals they have are, why other countries should join, how they can join, things like that. So I cut and pasted there from their strategic goals there. They hold a number of workshops, etc. And then, of course, the last is just to continue to develop and enhance the system, right? So right now, the global forum, the framework it's based on is identical to the APEC privacy framework, so that APEC CBPR system. They identically align right now, but that is like not always going to be the case, right? It's likely that the global forum may evolve beyond that. So let's then talk about, let's move to who's actually in this. Who are the participating regions? Let's go to the next slide. Great. So as you can see here, we've got members and we've got associate members. So remember I talked about we had 4 continents sort of represented. You can see those sort of on the left side. Those are all the economies, as they call them in APEC, but the jurisdictions that have joined, came from APEC, are now in the Global Forum. But since then, some other countries have signed on. So the United Kingdom joined last year, bringing sort of Europe into the fold, which is very exciting. The United Kingdom, after it left the EU, started to work on creating what are called these data bridges, and they've done that with the US, they've done that with Korea, and this is another one of their efforts, right, to promote this sort of interoperability, to promote data transfers, to make it easier for organizations to transfer that data and work together. So this is another avenue they pursued, and so as an associate member, all the associate members are included in expanding the global forum. So all those sort of strategic goals and objectives that I shared with you on the previous slides, they're sort of part of that discussion and shaping the way the system is developed. And eventually, as associate members will likely become members, full members, and join the system from that perspective. So we've got some other ones. So Bermuda is joined in 2024. We've actually got a few here. So Bermuda, we think, okay, maybe a small island nation, but it's one of the world's leading centers for insurance and reinsurance, which I learned recently, which is exciting. So a lot of data flows through there. Mauritius, with them joining, brings sort of the African continent in. So now we've got all 6 continents, inhabitable continents, represented, which is very exciting. Mauritius itself also a hub for investment funds and asset management across Africa and Asia. And then we've got the Dubai International Financial Center, another global financial center. Again, a lot of data traveling through these regions. All of these jurisdictions have joined, and to join, they have to do a couple of things. One, they have to map their privacy laws to the Global CBPR privacy framework, and there has to be some alignment there. And 2, they have to put forth an enforcement agent who will agree to cooperate with the other enforcement agents in the other countries. And so these jurisdictions have all done that, and 3 of them recently joined. probably maybe like a month or two ago. So that's really exciting. And I know that there will be more countries joining, which is frankly a good segue to talk to Maciek here, who recently came back, next slide, from India, because there was a CBPR workshop in India. So Maciek, why was there a workshop in India, CBPR workshop in India? They weren't on that member list. So why was it held, and what did you learn?
Yes, great. A few weeks ago, I joined a workshop in Delhi, India, the workshop on Global CBPR. The workshop was hosted by NASCOM, which is an association of software companies in India, and the two ministries from the Indian government. Well, you've talked about, strategic goals and objectives of promotion of the CBPR, global CBPR effort. And I think this workshop fits into that very well. The purpose of the workshop was to discuss the benefits of the system, build the case for India, share experiences of the companies who have been participating organizations and from other stakeholders. There were so many, great panels. We were discussing international data transfers, interoperability, data protection, and yeah, as I said, in the potential participation of the participation for India. The speakers and attendees included government officials, data protection officials from India, from participating economies, and the economies that, are considering whether they would like to join or not. Representative from industry associations, representatives from Indian companies, from foreign multinational companies. I spoke on the panels on the deep dive into the CBPR requirements and the role of accountability agent. We'll be speaking of the benefits of CBPR later, but some of the highlights, some of the things that I heard a lot from stakeholders, from participants is, one thing is this is internationally recognized framework, the intra-governmental forum that promotes free trade and for many companies could become enabler to market access among participating jurisdictions. This is a very strong argument for export-oriented economies, for companies from those economies. So, for many Indian companies, and really when you look at who are the major major economies, were major export partners for India, there are countries like US, Singapore. There are economies like US, Singapore, which are participating economies in the global CBPR. Another thing is, interoperability. Companies seek interoperability between the regulations. This is the framework that has been agreed upon by multiple economies and sets a commonly agreed standard. Another thing that the participants praised was, the spirit of collaboration, the pragmatic approach of CBPR, the emphasis of collaboration among the economies and beyond. Another thing is, this is a very important, and this is what many stakeholders were also highlighting. There is a third-party review built into the process. So, accountability agent reviews the privacy policies and practices of the applicants, of participating companies. so the companies can demonstrate accountability to multiple stakeholders. Important thing to know to note here, to give a little context on that workshop is India has introduced the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023, DPDPA in short. Among other things, DPDPA will set up a new adjudicating body, which is the Data Protection Board of India. Generally, in the law, there are no restrictions to transfers of data unless the jurisdiction has been recognized as restricted by the government or other sectoral or sectoral regulations. Some preliminary mapping that has been completed on the regulation has found a very close alignment. I have heard about numbers like 90% with CBPR requirements, and the work on mapping will continue once the rules on the DPDPA are finalized, and this is something that the stakeholders are waiting for right now. Speaking about mapping, Val, could you tell us about the interoperability of CBPR with OECD principles?
Of course. Before I do two things, one, I think first off, seeing countries like the UK as associate members and seeing interest from places like India is super exciting. I think for lots of us in the privacy community, we're desperately hoping for anything that kind of simplifies and streamlines program management. And these are just super exciting possibilities that we're hearing about. My second thing is I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second because I'm facing technical difficulties. I apologize, folks. So give me like 4 seconds to reboot the screen share, and hopefully I can solve it, and then I'll jump right into mapping.
While Val is doing that, there's a question in the chat about how does a country participate. So I mentioned two of the things that they have to do. One, map their laws to the CBPR framework. That's essential, right, to make sure that all those principles are actually applicable in the country that is joining. The second is they have to have an enforcement agent that joins, and that also is key for sort of enforcing this system, right, because it is voluntary and it is a number of countries, right, and that is often one of the limitations is countries not having jurisdiction in other areas, but through this sort of cooperative agreement of all these countries, they're able to sort of enforce it, which is something that allows it to exist. So in the United States, our enforcement agent is the FTC. All the other countries have their own enforcement agent. The third element is they have to have an accountability agent like TrustArc. So we are an accountability agent for the United States. And so for full membership, you move into that space as well.
Awesome.
And it looks
Thanks
like
a
Val's
lot.
back.
I'm back. You might need to help run Q&A because I can't get it to load with screen share. It's probably human. It's probably a user error over here. So jumping right into mapping global cross-border privacy framework rules. I want to talk a little bit about OECD. Some of you may be familiar, but for those of you that are not, it's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. For history nerds, it's kind of the successor organization to what was called the OEEC, which was the Organization for European Economic Cooperation that was created after World War II under the Marshall Plan. The reason why the OECD was established kind of a successor was actually to include other organizations. And what it's been known as sort of, since then is as an organization made up of some of the leading economies in the world, really designed to foster trade and economic development. And in 1980, which feels both like not that long ago and a long time ago, they created what was one of the first internationally agreed upon set of privacy principles. And if these look familiar, they should. These principles either directly or indirectly influence countless privacy laws. When you look at rules like the Data Private Protection Directive or GDPR in Europe, when you look at Australia's laws, when you look at many others, when you look at the APEC privacy framework, which I'll get into in a moment, you'll see parallels. And by the way, just as an aside note, as a practitioner, the OECD guidelines, if you're asking the question of where do I get started, one great answer always is, of course, our very own NIMITY privacy framework. But another great one is the OECD privacy principles. They're really a great way to build kind of a North Star to a privacy program, because you'll actually see pretty quickly, once you start to map some program requirements around them, you'll get a ton of benefits, including mapping to the APEC privacy framework, which is what underpins the global CBPR requirements. So you'll see here that I tried to map the principles to the corresponding global CBPR framework requirement, and it's a really nice fit. Global CBPR has a couple of additional things, particularly on preventing harm and choice, but it's a really good start to look at things like OECD. And again, like I said, if you're managing against a global program, and we'll talk a little bit about that later with benefits, it's a great place to begin. And of course, TrustArc can help you with closing the gaps. Great. So I think, with that, because GDPR is one of the more modern frameworks that folks look at based on OECD, I'll hand over to Maciek to talk about how GDPR's key principles, or some of them, map to CBPR.
Yeah, great. And in the past, there were some mappings made that, there were indicating 61, overlap of the CBPR requirements with GDPR. Just to take a step back, under CBPR, we have 9 principles, and they translate to 50 program requirements. And in this chart, you can see, in the first column, you can see the selected principles under CBPR. The second column are some of the requirements under GDPR, Article 5, and then the program requirements under CBPR. So the principal access and access correction under CBPR, we have data subject rights. So, among other rights, access to right to access, rectification, erasure. Under CBPR, we have access, correction, deletion that, has to be, there has to be mechanism to individuals for that. The principle, the CBPR principle, collection limitation under CBPR, the purposes for which the data is processed should be explicit, legitimate. Under CBPR, the collection has to be limited to specific purposes. Then the principle use of personal information. Under GDPR, we have, principle of data minimization. CBPR, the use must be limited to fulfill specified purposes of collection. And then the last one, which is kind of a combination of 2 principles, choice and use of personal information. So under GDPR, where the consent is relied upon, it must be, freely given, specific, informed, indication of wishes. And under CBPR, we have express consent. It is required when the use of personal information, for the use of personal information for the purposes that are not compatible with the original purpose of collection. So we have talked about those mappings, OECD mapping, comparison of GDPR and CBPR. Val, maybe we could talk about the benefits of the framework now.
Absolutely. And there are a lot. So as a client, I got into the APEC CBPR framework. It was right at the infancy of global. But the benefits are wide spanning. One is I worked at a global organization that was operating in 200 countries. And, while we had a global program, I had really good answers for what are we doing about things like GDPR, what are we doing about CCPA, et cetera. And I was looking at APEC and I was realizing that it solves a pretty meaningful piece of the puzzle by having considerable presence in places like Latin America and, of course, Asia Pacific region. And I was really excited about this because at the time DPF wasn't around yet, but it was Privacy Shield. And so we had this sort of umbrella vehicle between the United States and Europe to ease and simplify cross-border data transfers. And it was a great answer when clients of mine at GoTo, that's where I was prior, formerly called LogMeIn, would ask, what are you doing about data transfer in Europe? And of course, we could give them a DPA, but some people wanted something that was third-party validated. So we worked with TrustArc. We had a third-party certification. We were trustee verified, but also we participated directly with the Department of Commerce in the Privacy Shield framework. But that was really just one piece of the globe, right, as you know, and it didn't really answer the call of what are you doing everywhere else? And everywhere else, we were doing a lot, but I had to explain over and over again, here's all of our program, here's how we meet LGPD in Brazil, or Australia's Privacy Act, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the answer was just sort of, it was onerous to be giving that manual effort, especially when in the security space, people have started getting better at saying we have a SOC 2, or in Europe, we were saying we have a trustee certification. Enter APEC, right? So now there's this opportunity, a really unique opportunity to build what I kind of called a follow the sun data transfer model, where we had something that addressed the answer of what are you doing between, North America, the United States, particularly in the EU, but also what are you doing in some key regions in Asia and Latin America? Now, look, I know that there's a specific participating member list that Noel showed. However, the reality, in my opinion, is that as a client, I thought that was, in my opinion, a little bit secondary to the reality of the fact that OECD influenced the APEC privacy framework. The APEC privacy framework is effectively, and Noel and Maciek, please keep me honest, signed up to by all the APEC economies. So even though only some participated in CBPR or PRP, you're still going through the process of getting a validation with a third-party seal and a recognized framework that has requirements that are grounded and recognized by dozens of countries in that region. So it was super exciting, and I think it really simplified my own business operations by having an answer that was similar to what we had for some security stuff like SOC 2 and ISO 27001, like we had for Europe, which was that in addition to all the things that we do, we have this process through Trustee and through Privacy Shield. Now we have APEC. This did a couple of things. It simplified our answer during RFPs. It simplified our answer during negotiations. And critically, and one of the reasons why we got sponsorship, if you're wondering how do I get buy-in, was that at some point I remember folks who were responsible for Asia Pacific business units for a number of products, including LastPass, were saying, hey, look, we know we do a lot of things, but people are kind of asking, like, what else can we show to bolster that we have a privacy position? And this was a great calling. And that's actually why it was endorsed and sponsored, not only by, of course, the privacy team, but by the sales and marketing teams, because it was a useful vehicle to show that we're serious about privacy kind of everywhere. And that's why it was really exciting. And look, I think especially when Privacy Shield fell and there was that gap, it kind of bolstered the fact that APEC is really important. And it's why I think, in part, we're seeing these exciting motions around other economies and countries like the UK being interested, right? As these other vehicles and frameworks have changed, this has remained available. And I think seeing this global interest from like strong economies that are part of OECD and others is a really useful benefit. Third, and you can't ignore this, right? Having the seal, the trustee seal, is a huge marketing benefit, right? Having something that people can see quickly and easily on your website to show that you've done something, for example, in the APEC regions. You've done something, for example, for enterprise privacy, et cetera. It's just a tremendous overall benefit. And sometimes it reduces friction in the sales cycle. It improves trust, et cetera. So that was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Val. I mean, it's really helpful to have a perspective of, somebody who has been part of the system for a long time. Ursula, I think you've posted a comment from the UK website in the chat as well, which I think is also helpful. There's a lot of companies that have participated, well-known companies, Apple, IBM, MasterCard. There's only a handful. There's so many others, right? IBM being the first. We certified them back in 2013, I believe, right? So we've been doing this here at TrustArc for over a decade, and have been working with these companies who really, saw the same benefits that you have in it. Let's go to the next slide.
I'd be remiss to say if that wasn't part of my calculus too, Noel, is that when we were looking at APEC and we saw who was participating and
Yeah.
seeing the kind of powerhouse organizations that were involved, I think it was an indication of the fact that this was something and we wanted to, jump in at the ground level.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
No,
Go ahead.
if I may add something to the benefits, we were talking about, so Val was talking about, a perspective from a bigger company, and there are great benefits for PRP or CBPR for smaller companies. So for example, for processors, maybe smaller processors who are trying to increase their accountability, with the controllers, that could be a really good opportunity for them, but also for controllers to, to a great tool for vendor management and
That's a
vendor
really good point,
assessment.
Maciek. I did talk about my experience at a bigger organization, but ultimately, that was for GoTo where we'd already undergone the Privacy Shield verification process through TrustArc. We get the enterprise privacy certification. I think the point is simply that, it was a good add-on for us, but for you all, if this is your first process, the benefit is the same as it was for me when I did my first certification with TrustArc, which is that you have a dedicated person. They guide you through the process, and it can help you to build and mature your own program, as well as the obvious benefits of reducing friction, increasing trust in the sales cycle, etc. But it can kind of serve as an add-on or as a starting block for you because of the additional benefits that you get working with a company like TrustArc to build out this program.
Yeah, and on that, enhancing maturity, the compliance process, the reviews, this is a continuous process for everything. So I think this is also a great benefit for the participating companies.
Absolutely. So I do want to reference, so the way the system was designed too, there's a compliance directory that lists all the companies that participate. And one of the things that was intended was that, remember, this is internationally backed, right? So that if you are, let's say, a data controller and you are looking for a company to work with in a particular region, if you could look through, let's say, the PRP directory for the privacy recognition for processors, you could already see sort of outset, here are the companies that have proactively taken the step to demonstrate that they have those practices in place, right? So it also sort of serves that purpose. And if you are that processor, right, then you're sort of on that list. Same thing with the CBPR, right? These are all, it's publicly available, that information. So that's some of the benefits. We've covered a lot of stuff, but let's dive into some of the details of the system. If we can move to the next couple of slides.
Sure.
So Val kind of covered what those principles are. I'm just going to reiterate here for the cross-border privacy rules. It's 9 principles, 50 requirements. These ones here down the center in pink, those are generally sort of public-facing requirements, things like notice, providing access, providing choice, right? So those, that's why they're sort of highlighted there. The ones in blue are more internal back and work that companies have to do. And then you have this sort of overarching principle that doesn't have a specific requirement attached to it, but it's just a general principle to prevent harm. So let's move to the next slide then for PRP. So PRP covers 2 main principles. There aren't any of those public-facing ones that I mentioned, like notice, choice, access, because primarily processors are working with controllers. So that information is really going through the controller, and so they're not assessed against how they provide access, right? Those things are really kind of covered under accountability because processors have to demonstrate how are they accountable to the controllers they're working with, how are they, protecting that data, how are they notifying them of breaches or changes, do they have agreements in place around how the data can be used, etc. So those are really the areas that are covered. And there's 18 requirements under the privacy recognition for processors certification, which is a little smaller than CBPR because, as you know, privacy obligations are slightly different than controller obligations, and the certification reflects that. So let's move to this last slide. So I want to talk about getting the certification. We've talked about what the system is and who's joined and the value of it, but what is it actually like doing it? So for some of you, you've gone through this process probably many times, but for those of you who have not, what does that mean? What does it mean to get certified, right? And then join the system to be able to get this value? Well, first you have to demonstrate, much like the countries who had to demonstrate theirs, you have to demonstrate that you have the practices in place to meet those 50 requirements of CBPR or the 18 requirements of PRP. And so the way that it's set up is you have the program requirements and then you have assessment criteria. And that's the criteria that we here at Trustee use as a guide from the APEC and now global system to determine if your organization meets the requirements. So we use that guidance. So once you provide that information, we analyze it against that criteria and then move to this third stage here, identify any gaps that you have. Maybe one of the elements is not met, right? And I note on sort of the program requirements of the CBPR system and PRP. It applies to companies of really all sizes. So we're talking about the big ones, IBM, GB, MasterCard, those things like that. But there's also smaller organizations who participate in it. And so the system, the way it's written, I think was very thoughtful because it allows for both small companies to join and large. So the requirements are not as prescriptive. So you can implement these requirements and demonstrate them regardless of the size of your organization. You do not have to be a big multinational, for example, to meet, let's say, access requirements. Maybe you don't have an automated system for managing that. Maybe you manage access through a privacy inbox or an inbox. But there are different ways to meet the requirements, and they're drafted in such a way to allow for that variation. Anyway, so back to the process. So we've identified the gaps for you and said, here's the things that we've identified that don't meet that assessment criteria. We will walk you through what we found and help you to identify, maybe next things that you need to do in order to come up to that standard. You remediate. Once you do, you are certified. And then what happens? Well, you'll get this letter of attestation. You'll get the trustee seal that you can publicly post. That's sort of the digital representation of your participation. And then you're listed in the compliance directory. I did put a link to the APEC one. The global one is not yet live. In the question I answered from Michael here, cbprs.org, there's a compliance directory there for both systems. So you get listed in that, talks about what's covered in that. And that's the process that all of not only, U.S. companies go through, but if they're in other regions as well, they work with an accountability agent in that region. Yeah, that's that.
And this compliance review, Noel, as I've already mentioned, this is what many stakeholders have been highlighting, that it is a great benefit of CBPR. And another thing, the scalability of the certification, as you said, the program requirements will apply to everyone, but the way you implement it may be different, depending on the size of the company and other components.
Yeah. And I do want to give a nod to the team that delivers these here at TrustArc because, we do work with companies of really all sizes, and to be able to evaluate, you really have to understand how privacy is operationalized at a lot of different levels, and they really bring to bear when they do that work, what those, that operationalization looks like at different levels.
Yeah, they're incredibly helpful. I found that myself over the years with the certifications is that you have these interpretation questions, you need guidance, and this isn't just a team of folks who are kind of moving things from step to step. They are your guide, and they have access to not only their own knowledge set, which is large, but to the greater TrustArc organization, which has a knowledge team. And so you have this sort of ecosystem of support throughout the process, which is a huge benefit, not just of this cert, but kind of all our certs.
Yeah. So I know some of you, if you are our current customers currently participating in this, received an email from me probably last week. It was not my decision to add my picture. That was marketing. So just going to throw that out there.
It's a great picture.
But as you know, this right now the system is identical. We anticipate it will change over time. But this is sort of what it's like, and happy to answer any questions. That we've had some great questions already. I want to thank you for those. But what else can we tell you about how this works? It's a different kind of system than really any others that we work with here, but really has a lot of value because of it is this government-backed system, that I will say that all of the governments that join and participate are really invested in this. I've had the good fortune of attending some of these CBPR workshops, and when you go, there are sometimes 24 to 30 different countries, some physically represented there, talking about sort of what stage they're in their own country with respect to privacy laws or what their interest level is, and a lot of these bigger countries, are participating in that discussion, even if they haven't yet joined as associate members or as full members. So Brazil attends. There's a number of countries out in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya. You have, folks in Asia, Indonesia, Thailand. So there's just a number of countries around the globe who are participating in this discussion. And I expect that, we will begin to see more and more countries joining. Is there a recertification frequency for companies? So great question. It didn't cover. So this is annual. That's required by the global system. So it's an annual recertification. So we go through this process. The first time around takes about 90 days, depending sort of on what your maturity already is. And then it's an annual one. Okay.
And the 90 days, just to be clear, I think it depends on kind of not only your maturity, but your own kind of resource focus. It can be much quicker and it can be a little bit slower too, depending on your own timing.
We got another question here I'll throw out. To spend the effort and cost to join, a company needs to balance risk versus cost. I'd love for you to take this one, Val, actually. What major enforcement actions are happening in these regions to justify joining? I don't know. You've joined you were participating in it, so
Yeah.
how would you answer that?
I'll answer that from my perspective, which very loyally non-answer in some ways, but I'll give you my take, which is that I think if you're using enforcement actions as your first driver, that's a very reactive kind of program measure, and personally, I always try to get out of the reactive phase. So I tried to move into proactivity, which is why I was looking at where these requests were coming from to begin with, right? If customers are asking, that's a bit of a canary in a coal mine for you, that as you're entering certain markets and presence, you're going to be getting certain requirements and requests. And so that was my calculus, honestly. So it wasn't necessarily looking at that somebody got fined or somebody's being investigated in a certain region, and so therefore this is the answer. It was more so that this is something that will, fortify the business to begin with, so that you don't need to respond to that, right? I guess in the same way that lawsuits and fines they're a symptom, right? They're a symptom of the fact that your program has something missing. I view, doing something like validating against the CBPR framework as a preventative measure so that you don't see that symptom, if that makes sense. So I know that necessarily wasn't as tactical as you might have wanted. I don't know if you were looking for a specific, regional issue that prompted it. That wasn't necessarily my calculus, but Noel and Maciek, I don't know what you've seen.
Well, so what I will add to that is, some of the countries that have joined have codified this into their law, right? So they have recognized the system as a transfer mechanism. So, Singapore has acknowledged, it's, that if you are a participant in these, if you have these sort of certification, that those are adequate in alignment with their regional law. So that, the flip side of enforcement is if there are transfer requirements for a region, this can satisfy those for those who have codified it. Of the companies that have joined, do you have a way to assess percentage between B2C versus B2B? I wonder if B2B companies have less incentive to join other than being proactive. I couldn't say offhand what percentage, but there's frankly a fair number of both. From the B2B perspective, what we see is, there are some companies that, so if you are B2B, let's say you're, companies are constantly having to assess each other, right? Or you are getting assessed, right? Because that's part of all our data privacy obligations. And so some companies, especially the bigger ones who know how resource intensive it is to do this assessment on all the companies they work with, will accept a PRP certification as a statement of their sort of to demonstrate their privacy readiness or their privacy, maturity, and in some cases move to sort of the next stage of the sales process. So there are those tangible benefits for companies in that B2B context, right? For B2C, maybe it is, more reputational. You want to demonstrate that or use it as a transfer mechanism, but that sort of exists also in that B2B context because we frankly all are in this series of assessing and reassessing each other.
B2B and B2C, not to move into a different but related topic, are a bit of a spectrum themselves because under a lot of laws, what constitutes a consumer includes a lot of small businesses. And so that itself is a bit of a continuum anyways. And the way that because I worked at a company that was both in some ways, primarily B2B, but it had some, consumer leaning, e-commerce type stuff. The way that I look at it is that I view B2B company transactions as more of it's more often that it's between two sophisticated parties, right? So you're actually more likely to get scrutinized quicker in a B2B transaction versus in B2C, where again, what you might be seeing is a symptom where after XYZ happens, a certain consumer may be raising an issue which goes to a regulator. But that means that you've now you're reacting, right? So in a B2B space, it actually is more likely that you'll be asked, as I was, during the RFP, during the contracting process, et cetera, before they even choose to give you any business, what are you doing in these regions? How are you complying with certain laws or regulations, or how are you assessing that your data is being transferred, our data is being transferred rather, because they would be the controller, in a legal and ethical way. So you kind of see it across both, but like I said, B2B and B2C do sometimes have a hard line in some companies. But in general, because of the fact that there are lots and lots of laws all over the world where small and micro businesses are considered consumers under consumer protection laws, it's best to look at your organization. That's why we have that disclaimer in the beginning about, consulting counsel, because there's a bit of a spectrum there in terms of risk assessments.
All right. Another question. This may be out of scope, more of curiosity, but have you seen sales and or account managers engaging the certification process instead of a privacy arm of the company? So I think your question is either have they, has the sales team been the driver for getting the certification? I think that's your question. And thanks, appreciate that. The answer is yes, absolutely. Certainly sales marketing teams are, they like to have this in hand, right?
They funded it at GoTo. While the privacy team administered it, the funding was actually in support of sales and marketing. So they were the ones who said, yes, we'll fund and support this because it helps our business case in these regions.
In certain industries, they, this is a differentiator, right? We see that with sort of companies that are competing in different industries, will use that as their advantage to say, well, this is how we're different than our competitor because we take privacy seriously. We care about these things. So yeah, it's a great question. Thank you.
Well, assuming there are no more questions, thank you everybody for joining. Or if you have particular questions for any one of us about this or kind of anything else about TrustArc, we remain available. But otherwise, thanks everybody for joining. Take care.
Thank you.